Hello everyone. In this video we'll be taking a look at what we've learned about building a macro using user parameters and applying that to create a turntable setup. I've taken the example that you can find in Help, Example Projects, Turntable Project, and I've adapted that for this demonstration. I'll quickly walk you through what's in the scene already and then we can go about building our UI. So first of all, I have 3 different assets coming in, 2 robots and a pony. And they are all in a variable switch node with a variable name of asset. And it has the 3 different patterns for our 3 different assets. And I've added them to the global graph state variables so you can easily switch between them. So we have our pony, a robot 1, and a robot 2. I've made them so that they have quite different bounding boxes. So a good example of how we can automatically adjust the camera based on what asset we have. Okay, so next I'm going to merge in my camera that I've created, and then we have the turntable setup where we'll be setting everything up. And let's dive inside that node with Control Enter, and this has a color check for our reference spheres and Macbeth chart, as well as some geometry for our asset to sit on. And these are both merged together. And then the main scene is merged in. So there's our asset and camera. Then we have another variable switch node, and this has 3 different options for lighting: a neutral HDRI, day and night. And again, we've got the patterns here and they've been added to the global graph state variables. Next, there's a render settings node with our camera. So what we want to do is hook this up so that the camera name can be set on our UI. Then we have this switch for pruning the color check. So we can make that as an option as well if you want to have the color check in your scene or not. Next we have another switch, and this time we either have a transform 3D that sets it to interactive, which we'd want to add to our camera as well, so allow us to move the camera around, or it will use a point constraint to constrain the camera to our asset and using the bounding box, and then use the dolly constraint to pull it back based on the bounds of our asset. And that will help us frame it no matter what asset gets added in. And we like it to be so you can choose between the two, either a free moving camera or lock it to the asset. Next, we have a parent-child constraint, so we can constrain our color check to our camera. Then we'll resolve all these constraints. And finally, we have 2 transform 3Ds that we're going to use. So we can have one that will spin our geometry around 360 degrees and one that will spin our lights. And finally in the scene, we have something to set up our resolution for our camera, and then setting up our renderer settings. So in this case, 3D light and a render node. Okay, so that's all pretty straightforward. Let's start building the UI for our node. So to do that, we're going to go up to the wrench icon on this group node and click Edit User Parameters. What I want to do is add 4 groups. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is going to separate out some of the parameters we want to make it a little bit easier for the user. We can have one section that is for our asset, so our asset options. Another one for our camera. Next, we're going to have light options. And finally, spin options. And what I'm going to do is for each of these, I'm going to set them to be expanded by default, so that when the user creates a node, they're all laid out and they don't have to expand. So first of all, we're going to add in a string node to our asset options, and we're going to make this a widget type of scene graph location. And we're going to name this asset path, so where our asset lives in the scene graph hierarchy. And what we want this to have is a bounding box for the entire asset that we can then use to place the camera. So the way I've set it up is all of my assets come in under root world geo asset, and at this asset level it has the bounds. So here's the bounds of my pony, for example. I'm just going to add this in here. We do the same for the camera. We're going to add a string that is a scene graph location, and we're going to name this camera path. We're going to add our camera to this. Okay, and then we're going to go inside our turntable node, and we want to first of all set up the render settings for the camera. So I'm just going to shift click on this node so we can see them both. So down here is our camera, and I'm just going to hit spacebar so we can see all of this. We want to link these two together. So I'm going to right click on this node and make an expression, and I'm going to change the expression, and I'm going to use a reference expression and say equals up slash user dot camera options dot camera path. I click off this and it changes the till to say this is now linked, and we're linking it to this. I'm going to copy this expression because I'm going to use it a couple more times. So let's shift unclick this one and we'll go to another node. So we're going to do this one as well because this is to do with the camera. I'm going to shift click on the transform 3D node, and we're going to right click and expression, and add the same expression here. So now that's going to allow us to be able to move our camera around. And then on the right hand side, let's just remove this one first and add this. So now we want to link the camera again. We want to link the camera to our asset, so we're going to make this an expression as well. And we're just going to tweak this to be asset options and asset path. Okay. And if we view this node, we'll be able to see now that the camera is on top of our asset. And then now we're going to use the dolly node to pull it back away from our asset and perfectly frame it. So we're going to do the same thing again, make that an expression with the camera for the base path and the asset for the target path. Okay, and then it's set to the target bounds of the bounding box. Now view this node and it pulls back the camera. If we look through the camera, we can see, actually if I just pop this down so we can see the bounding box, that perfectly aligns to the edge of our camera. And if we were to switch to another asset, so our robot 1, see again the bounds perfectly fit, and robot 2, bounds perfectly fit. And switch back to our pony. And this back out again so we can see it. Okay, and then also now we want to hook up this switch because currently we have it so that we can move our camera around. We want to have it so that you can choose between the two. So let's go to our turntable setup. And what we want to do under the camera options is add a number. And we're going to call this auto position camera. I'm just going to copy that name. Okay. And we're going to change this widget type to a checkbox. We're going to have it checked on. And then for our switch, we're going to make this an expression. I'm just going to expand this out again so we can see it. And we want to link this one. So we want to go equals up slash user dot camera options dot and then auto position camera. Okay. So now tick this off and move it around, tick it, and it snaps. Okay. So next, let's set it up so that we can prune or not our chart, and we'd also like to link it so we can see it through our camera. We'll make it so that you can position it in different areas through your camera. Okay, so let's add to our asset options a number, and we'll rename this to include chart. We're going to make that checkbox as well. And then under our asset options, we're going to add another group. And we'll rename this one chart options. And what we'll do is, if this is not ticked, then we don't want to display the chart options. So we'll do a conditional visibility option on this. And we'll say equal to. And then for our include chart, it has to equal 1. Okay. Now for the chart options, what we're going to do is add in 3 options, and they're all going to be numbers. And we need 1 that we're going to use for the chart position. Then another one is going to be for our scale. And then finally, we're going to have one, the chart Z position. Okay, and then for the chart position one, we're going to make this a mapping pop-up menu. And then for the options for that, do something a little bit funny. So what we can do is say that, do you want to put this in, you know, the top right, top left, bottom right, bottom left. We're going to have 4 options like that. And top right, top left, bottom right, bottom left. And the way it would work is, if you're in the top right, then that's going to be all positive. If you're on the top left, then that would be, you know, like a sort of timesing it by 1 and then timesing it by -1. And then the bottom right would be timesing it by -1 and 1. And then the bottom left would be timesing it by -1, -1. But we can't do something like this where we just put like 1, 1 as a coordinate. And we can't do 1.1 because we can't have -1 point -1. So what we can do is do something a little bit cheeky and add 2 to these values. And then when we read those values back in, we can -2 from it. So what we can do is say that this is 3.3 and this would be 3.1. This one would be 1.3. And finally, this one would be 1.1. Okay, it will become clear in a little bit when we read the values, hopefully. Okay, and then we're just going to set it to be the top right to start off with. And then for the chart scale, what we're going to do is add some options here. So for the minimum, we want it to be 0.1. Actually, let's make it 0.05. The maximum we'll have as 0.125. And the sensitivity will bring that right down to 0.01. We'll display the slider and we'll do minimum the same. Center we'll have as 0.1. And the maximum we'll have as 0.125. Because we'll have to make our reference spheres a lot smaller than they are coming in right now. Okay. And let's just set that at the middle of 0.1. Then for the chart Z position, we're going to have that so that the value is 1 as a minimum, and let's say 50 as a maximum. Leave the sensitivity, and we'll add the slider. And again, 1, 25, 50. Okay, we're going to set that as 1 as its minimum. So we've got our options now for the chart, and we need to read those and set it up. So let's go inside our node. And first of all, we want to parent-child constraint our camera color check to our camera. So let's now view this, and we want to the target path of our camera. So we're going to make that as an expression. And again, equals up / user dot camera options dot camera path. Okay, so now let's turn on the auto position camera, and we need to link our prune for our include chart so that we can turn that on or off. So let's go into the switch color correct node, and we'll view node at the same time, and we're going to make this an expression as well, and equals up / user dot asset options dot include chart. Okay, and we do want to include our chart, so let's tick this on. So now we've linked our chart to our camera, but we need to position this so that we can see it through our camera. So it definitely needs to be scaled down, and then we want to have the options of where to place it. So to do that, we are going to go to the chart here, and we have this transform 3D, and we want to edit this. So first thing I'm going to do is use the uniform scale. So right click this and copy, and I'm going to paste as an expression onto the translate of Z, and then I'm going to make that a minus, so it goes the opposite way. And what that will mean is as you scale it up, it will move away from the camera, and from the camera's perspective, it will look the same. Let's just make this a bit smaller so we can see that. And let's look through the camera. And as you can see, this is now just moving back and forward, and it doesn't appear to be scaling. But from perspective view, we can see that it is scaling up. Okay. So let's make this an expression, and we want this to get the scale that we're going to set. So let's just user dot asset options dot chart options dot chart scale. Okay, let's just make this a bit bigger so we can see that. And we're going to link this one with the same expression. This one. And then we'll link this expression to the chart Z position. Okay. And then let's have a look at that. It's in the center and it's scaled. And we can now scale our chart up and down and move it in Z. But now we need to kind of place it, where we want using this chart position. So what we can do is let's go back in here and view the transform 3D again. We're going to make this an expression. This is where things get a little bit tricky. I'm going to copy and paste this as an expression onto X. And we're going to take the uniform scale. We're going to divide that by 2.5. Then we're going to multiply that result by its position using the chart position that we're storing on our top level. So we're going to use the mod f function, and what that will do is split our value between the integer and the remainder. We're going to use get parent dot user dot asset options dot chart options dot chart position, and then we're going to take the 0 value of the result and multiply that by 10. So if it's 0.1, it becomes 1. If it's 0.3, it becomes 3. And then we're going to minus 2 from that. So now it's either 1 or minus 1. Okay. And we're going to do something similar for y. So let's just going to copy this and slightly change it so it's divided by 6. And instead of using mod f, we're going to use int, and then we don't need to times it by 10 or get the first position. Okay, so these values of 2.5 for x and 6 for y are just rough values that I worked out that moved the reference spheres and Macbeth chart to the right positions. So now if we go back to our main menu, we see it's in the top right, and then we change it to top left, bottom right, bottom left, and we can still move it back and forward in Z and scale it up and down. That's all looking good. So let's now add our light options. So the first thing I'm doing is just going to add a tele parameter, and from our project settings, go to the variables, I'm just going to add our HDRI, so middle mouse click and drag, drop it here, and that will just give easy access to the same thing that you have in the global graph state variables. Let's also add a number, and let's call this light exposure. Let's, for the widget options, we'll set it as -5, 0, and 5, so we can change it by 5 stops. Same for the slider, -5. Oh, sorry. Save me. Maximum 5, drag sensitivity 0.1, and that would be 0 and 5. So now we can drag this, and we want to link that to exposure that's in our light. So just going to do that for the neutral HDRI as an example. So let's view this at the same time. Select our light, go to material and exposure. We're going to make that as an expression. Now what you would think you would do is the same as we've been doing for everything else, is equals up / user dot light options dot light exposure, and that says error, cannot find it. Now the reason for that is with a Gaffer 3, this is a super tool UI that's displaying the material, but this material node is buried inside the Gaffer 3. So let's have a look at that. So if we go inside this node, you've got the root package, and inside there you have your environment light, and inside there is where we have the material. So we need to actually go up 3 more levels. So 1, 2, 3. And now it's linked. Okay. So we've got our light options. Lastly, we need to set up our spin options. So we're going to add some numbers for this. Okay, so we've got 3 options here. And we're going to do spin duration. So how many frames do we want it to do a 360 spin? So let's set that to minimum of 0, maximum of 100. And because this is frames, we're going to make sure it's displayed as integer and the sensitivity is 1. And we're going to make it a slider. And we'll set this as 50 as the center and 100 as the maximum. And click OK. And we'll set it currently to 50. And then we'll just have 2 options. Do you want to spin asset, which will be a checkbox, or do you want to spin the lights? So spin lights, make that checkbox as well. It's quite standard practice to have your asset move around 360 degrees and then your lights also spin around 360 degrees. So the asset can be checked to make sure that it is working correctly, is reacting to lights correctly. Okay. And then inside our node, we're going to do these 2 transform 3Ds. So we're going to rotate in Y our asset. So let's link this to the geometry. So we need to go equals up / user dot asset options dot asset path. And for the expression in Y, we're going to use an if-else statement. And this is a little bit complicated, so I'm just going to copy and paste it and walk you through it. So what this says is if else, if it's a case of its spin asset, then if something else 0. Okay, so if it's active, then do something, otherwise it's 0. So that's going to set this as 0 unless we turn it on. And then if that is a case of it's in between the frame of 0 frame at the current frame and our spin duration, then take the frame and multiply it by 360 and then divide that by the spin duration. So that will give us, take the 360 and divide it into segments and add that along for how many frames we've got. Otherwise, be 0. Okay. So now, as we move this along, let's turn on spin asset. That'll be helpful. Now, as we move this along, we can see this moves. We get up to 50 frames, which is our maximum here, and it stops. We turn this off, and it's just set to 0 and doesn't do anything. Okay, and let's do the same for our geometry, our lights, sorry. Okay, and we're going to do a slightly different one. So, expression here. You can see this is already hooked up to our root world light location. Copy and paste this. What this one is doing something similar, but it says if it has got spin lights and spin asset, then take the duration and multiply that by 2. Otherwise, take the duration. So let's see that in action. So if we currently don't have it turned on, so it's never going to be active. And then we turn on spin lights. And then after it gets past 50, it becomes active all the way around to 100. But if we turn off the asset, it's only lights, then it will spin from 0 to 50. Excellent. So that's that set up. Now, if we adjust our spin duration, it'll be great if the project settings updated as well. So let's add a button to allow us to do that. And let's rename this to Update Project Settings. Okay. And then for the widget options, got some code here which I'll explain. So first of all, we're going to use node, which is whenever you run code on a specific node, it already has a predefined variable called node for the node you're running your script on. So we can use that. We can say node.getParameter. I'm going to get user.spinOptions.spinAsset.getValue at time 0. So that's just going to say if spin asset is on or not. And the same for lights, is that on or not? And then the spin duration, so how long is it spinning for? And then we're going to get the root node using nodegraph.api.getRootNode. And then from the root node, that is where the out time is stored. So we can use getParameter outTime, and that's going to get this parameter here. And then we're going to set the value to the spin duration, so how many frames we're spinning for, multiplied by if we have spin asset or spin lights on. Okay, and then we're going to set that for frame 0. Okay, so let's click that now, and it's automatically updated to 50 frames because we have the spin duration of 50 and just the lights on. We turn on spin asset and we click that. Now it's 100 frames. Set this to 100 and we click it. And now it's 200 frames. Okay, so let's give this a spin. Aha, that's a great pun. Let's move it back so we've got, horse's face instead of horse's bum. And we can finish editing user parameters for now. And let's go to our render and we can kick off a live render. And I've set everything to be updated if you change anything. And let's see what happens. So live render. There's our horse. The light's a bit dark, so let's increase the exposure a little bit. So let's set it to maybe 3. Great. Let's change our asset. So let's change it to robot 1. Automatically changes the camera here and updates our live render. Let's try our other robot, so robot 2. And there it goes. Let's try changing a frame, so we move them around. Let's turn off auto position camera. And we can move around wherever we want. Back on again. Scale up our chart a bit. We feel like it needs to be bigger. Move it back and forward. Actually, let's change it to the top right and then move it back and forth. There you go. Okay, see if turning off the chart works. It's gone. Everything seems to be working really well. Okay, so this is ready to be shipped out. So let's just tidy up the node a little bit and then we can save it as a macro. I'm just going to stop my live render and just go back to edit user parameters. And I'm going to show user parameters at top level. So now if I finish, we don't see the user group. And also I'm going to make it look like a regular node instead of a group node. Okay. And then let's just set it back to some default values that we'd want. So set that back to 0. And let's make it back to 50 frames. to include the chart by default. Set this to 0.1 and 1. And let's say bottom left can be the default. And then let's do save as macro, accept. Okay, and now it is part of our menu and we can just add it in whenever we need it.